talk about an issue that just about every family raising bilingual kids runs into at some point. You're talking to your child in the language you want them to practice, but they refuse to respond in that language. Or your kid is taking Spanish classes, but you never really hear him or her speak the language. We'll be using Spanish as an example language here since we have a Spanish school for kids. So, how in the world do we get our kids to respond in Spanish or any language we're trying to teach them? Or how do we make sure our kids are learning to speak the language and not just understand the language in their Spanish classes or bilingual dual language classrooms? When this happens, parents might feel frustrated or disappointed or wondering if the classes are really working, but actually, it's completely normal, and it doesn't mean that your kids are rejecting the language. So let's dive deeper into that. Before we do, though, I want to explain some language education terminology that I will be using in this video. I'm going to be talking in terms of the majority language and the minority language. The majority language is the one the child hears most of the time. For example, let's say you're an English-speaking family in the US and you want your kids to learn Spanish. You speak English in the home, and English is the dominant language at school. In this case, English is the majority language and Spanish is the minority language. The same is true even if one or both parents speak to the child in Spanish. English is still the majority language because it's what your kid is hearing at school, on the playground, with their friends. Now, I want to be clear that this isn't just a US issue or an issue with native English speakers. You could have the same issue with an English-speaking family living in Mexico City. They want their kids to learn English and they speak to them in English at home. But the kids answer back in Spanish because that is the majority societal language. So why do kids do this? And what can you do about it? I've got some ideas to share with you. They're based on information from my 15 years running my kids' Spanish immersion school, Parents Magazine, the website Bilingual Kids Rock, and the language educators at Helen Doran English. I share links to these resources in the description of the video, and I really encourage you to check them out. I also want you to know that I'm speaking both as a language teacher and as someone who has learned 3 languages as an adult, and very importantly, as a mom who's raising her kids trilingual. So I know where you're coming from, whether you're a native speaker or a non-native speaker, or you don't speak it at all, but you're trying to incorporate a second language into your child's life. A common reason that kids don't respond in the minority language is they simply know that they don't have to. Like us, kids like to do things the easy way and stay in their comfort zones. And if they know you speak the majority language, they might decide not to do the extra work to come up with a reply in the minority language. The solution here is to create situations where they have no choice but to use the minority language. This is why our Spanish classes at True Fluency Kids are taught almost entirely in Spanish from day one, depending on the level of the student. And the teacher helps the child respond in Spanish. You could also try things like enrolling your child in a language immersion summer camp. But please be aware that kids will speak to each other in the majority language, so they won't get a lot of one-on-one time speaking the language in any large class scenario. You'll still need to supplement and find ways for your child to get small group or one-on-one connection with the language speaking. It's also best if they start from day one knowing it's a Spanish-only environment or whatever language you're doing. Whether it's a school, a weekly babysitter, a weekly in-person tutor, a Spanish class online, meeting a new friend that speaks the target language, what you start with is what you want to continue, so don't start in English. It's actually hard to change that language later if you don't start in this target language. That's why I started introducing Spanish to my daughter at 6 weeks old, but you can start this at any age. I started her French at 1 year old and never spoke to her in English or Spanish again. So now All she really knows is Mom speaks to me in only French. It's actually a little weird to speak to her in Spanish or English now. It's become a consistent habit that I've created in our lives. And you can do the same thing, whether it's you or someone else in your child's life, if you're not a speaker of the language you want your child to learn. I've also found that kids get more motivated to speak a minority language when it connects them to something they're interested in. Try introducing them to books, movies, shows, games, and anything in the minority language they like. If, for example, a singer that they like speaks Spanish, they might decide that it's cool for them to speak Spanish too. In my home, there are actually no books in English and no TV in English. Nothing in English. This might change as she gets older, but that's what we're doing for the first 6 years of her life. She gets enough English from society, school, my family, who only speaks English, the grocery store, everywhere else is English. Oddly enough, but maybe not really, her strongest language is still English, even after all of my hard work. Spanish is very close behind English, if not equal, and then French is close third. So I have to stay consistent in our home with as many resources as possible in Spanish or French. And you do too, with whatever language you're choosing. Also, find community. If your kids see other families speaking this language, they will realize it's not just their family who speaks it. If you live in a place where no one else speaks the language you're trying to give your child, you'll need to look online for classes and conversation partners, or make sure to call your family daily if you have that as a resource. If you have the community, get to know other families who are using this language at home or trying to use it in daily activities. I have purposely found other families who speak Spanish in the home, and I'm making it a point to ask them to go to the park on the weekends. Also, seek out neighborhoods where kids speak that language so they hear it being used naturally. Find other families at the library in those neighborhoods. My babysitter took my daughter to the library and got to know a Spanish-speaking family there. And now they have play dates and the kids chat in Spanish. My daughter sees that others are living in Spanish too. It's not just her. I also chose to live in a predominantly Spanish-speaking neighborhood in Dallas, and I love when my daughter walks down the street, hears Spanish being spoken by the neighbors, and chimes in, "Hola." Finally, I'd really encourage you to be a good role model for your kids when it comes to language learning. In the Parents Magazine article I linked to in this video description, there's an anecdote that might feel familiar to a lot of bilingual families, but this is applicable even if you don't speak another language at home. It's about a family in the US and both parents speak Spanish and English, but the dad speaks mostly Spanish at home It's about a family in the US and both parents speak Spanish and English. The dad speaks mostly Spanish at home since he is Spanish dominant, but the mom speaks both at home. Lately, the kids have started refusing to respond in Spanish. The mom realized that even though she speaks Spanish herself, she would usually respond to the dad in English because he understands English. She also realized this wasn't the role model that she wanted to set for her kids. But what if you don't speak Spanish or another language? You can be a good role model even if you don't speak the minority language yourself. Why not try to learn alongside your child? You'll be showing them that speaking this language is important and that you're also willing to put in the work it takes to learn it, even when you make mistakes or it feels uncomfortable. We actually provide a lot of mini Spanish lessons on our TikTok channel for parents to help teach their kids Spanish. These are designed specifically for non-native Spanish-speaking parents. I suggest choosing one question and answer to focus on each week. Put that question answer on a flashcard on your fridge and use it anytime that situation comes up. So for example, ¿Qué haces? What are you doing? Estoy comiendo. I'm eating. So every time your child is eating, which happens daily, you can ask this question and they can practice answering you. After a year, this will be 52 daily questions and answers. That is a great year of learning and incorporating Spanish or whatever language you want into your daily routine. And it's real learning too. Listening, understanding the spoken question, being able to respond logically, in context, in real time, in real life, that's learning. You've created an experience that your child can connect to, just like they learned their first language. If Spanish is the minority language for your children, True Fluency Kids online classes could be a great fit for them. Like I said earlier, all of our classes are taught in Spanish. They're just plain fun with lots of music, games, and other activities. And they're a great way for your child to meet other bilingual kids. Please subscribe for more language learning tips, bilingual parenting suggestions, and tons of Spanish lessons you can use daily. Here's to fluency!